Well, to get the view from the ground, let's go to Caracas, where I'm joined by Emiliana Duarte. She's a journalist and co-founder of Caracas Chronicles, an independent news and analysis organization. Emiliana, good to have you on the Newsmakers. Could you tell us what it's like on the streets right now?
Well, this morning, Venezuela woke up to a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos after what has been a very chaotic 24 hours ever since yesterday at dawn. Interim President Juan Guaido sent a message out through social media, through a video, flanked by what looked like around 30 or so military officers from the National Guard, calling once again on the people to join him in his path to get Nicolas Maduro to seize the usurpation of the office, is what he refers to, obeying his interpretation of the Constitution that Nicolas Maduro is holding the office illegitimately.
He called the people to join him. Is it clear how many people joined him?
It looked like tens of thousands. The call for people to go on the street and support these dissident military personnel, and also it's important to note dissident political police officers, probably the highest ranking defection to date. This was a surprise impromptu call. Venezuela is notorious for having very censored media, and information is difficult to access. But regardless, ever since that video was released in the morning, by noon, there have been tens of thousands of people in Caracas, where I was at. And I've confirmed that protest also happened in around 20 states all throughout Venezuela.
Okay, Nicolas Maduro says he has foiled the plot or the move. Is that correct?
Well, there were battling messages because Juan Guaido also released a video broadcast last night saying that the military throughout Venezuela has joined the cause of restoring democracy, and Maduro claims otherwise. Of course, Maduro went live through all television and radio stations last night, surrounded by some cabinet members and members of the high military command. Like I said, it's a very confusing moment because different versions are claiming different outcomes, and I imagine that things are still very fluid, and we have yet to see what the denouement of today's events are. Another giant demonstration has been called for by Guaido last night, and we're still waiting to see what the turnout is going to be like.
Right. And in many ways, this is a question of who has more legitimacy. Maduro says, I am the elected president. Guaido says, no, you're not. I am the elected president. Is there any way to verify it, whether it's by counting the amount of people who go to the streets, or is there any way to actually poll the people of Venezuela to find out who they support?
Well, the reason that ever since Juan Guaido took the oath of office as interim president on January 23rd, he laid out 3 steps that were necessary to restore constitutional order in Venezuela. Like I said, because the claim that Maduro was elected last year through a sham election has been heavily questioned, not just by Guaido supporters, but also over 50 countries that do not recognize Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate president. Every time there is a call for people to go out on the streets and support Guaido and his quest to restore democracy, the underlying premise has been to get the military to break. And that's why every event, every call to action ever since January 23rd has been aimed at that objective. The humanitarian aid airlift that occurred in February sought to have the military symbolically switch sides. And amnesty laws have been also approved by the opposition National Assembly as an incentive to get the high-ranking military officers to switch sides. And at this point, the question of legitimacy remains. But if it's just a matter of counting the number of people on the street, I think it's pretty evident that turnout always ends up being larger when it comes to Guaido. The second step that Guaido mentioned after seizing the usurpation of office is to convene a transitional government so that the third step can take place, which is for free and fair elections to be called as soon as possible. But it is Guaido's thesis that free and fair elections can only happen once Maduro cedes power, since he controls all institutions, and every election that has happened in the past couple of years has been called heavily into question.
Emiliana Duarte, thanks for joining us here on the Newsmakers from Caracas. Let's broaden out this discussion and bring in three new guests. In Caracas is Paul Dobson, a journalist at Venezuela Analysis. In Washington, D.C. is former Congressman Gustavo Coronel. He was also a founding board member of the Venezuelan state-owned oil company Petróleos de Venezuela. And also joining us is political strategist Jose Aristimuno, who's working closely with Juan Guaido's team. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Paul, did Emiliana accurately describe the situation on the ground in Caracas?
Yes, to some extent, I would agree with her description of the events of yesterday. Yesterday was undoubtedly an attempted coup d'etat by Juan Guaido and his team. It was a failed coup d'etat. We can only count around 15 soldiers who heeded his call to rebel against the chain of command and against the elected president of Nicolas Maduro. His main ally quickly ran into hiding and is currently in the Spanish embassy seeking asylum. So I think Juan Guaido very much defeated yesterday in his political objectives. The government seemed very calm in their response to the activities of yesterday. President Maduro addressed the nation at 9 o'clock in the evening. He felt no need to do so beforehand. There was no sense of panic in his words. And the high military command also issued a number of statements throughout the day, very calmly reinforcing the fact that there was no real threat to the constitutional order yesterday, despite the attempt by Juan Guaido to do so.
Gustavo Coronel, is Operation Freedom dead? Has it failed?
Operation Freedom certainly is very much alive. This is a process. This is not a one-time thing. And as you know, the legitimate government of Juan Guaido has been in action for 3 months or so. So what happened last night is one point in the curve. Today, Venezuelans are in the streets. The government of Mr. Maduro, or rather the regime of Maduro, is extremely weak. And the outcome is inevitable. Maduro is going to be out of power very soon. You cannot call this a coup d'etat simply because the legitimate government of Guaido is the one trying to displace this gang of gangsters who have taken the Venezuelan people hostage. What we have in the Maduro government is really a combination of very high corruption, high inefficiency, and cruelty. The way they are subjecting the Venezuelan people to all kinds of humiliations and privations. This is very well known all over the world now.
Okay. Let me bring in Jose. Jose, if the army really was behind Guaido, wouldn't Maduro be dead, in jail, or in exile by now?
I gotta agree. First and foremost, let's be very clear. I mean, the Maduro regime has been in power for over 5-10 years. If you include Hugo Chavez, you're talking about over 20 years that they have been in power. This takes time. Guaido has been in power for a little bit over 4 months now, so it's going to take time. The solution doesn't come overnight. I don't think Operation Freedom has failed at all. I think we're getting very, very close. In regards to your question about the military, each and every day, more and more militaries are coming and supporting Guaido because they understand he's the president. They understand that a majority of the international community, over 50 countries across the world, support President Guaido. There's no way that Maduro can remain in power. He's being caught economically, financially. We're bringing in humanitarian aid thanks to President Guaido. It's going to take time, and let's be very clear. Let's be very clear that there are rumors that Maduro was getting ready to leave to Cuba yesterday, and the Russians stopped him, and that could potentially be very true.
Right. Right. The Russians say that's information war.
The Venezuelan people are going to be out on the street.
Right. Pompeo mentioned that the Russians say this is part of the information war at the moment and that it's not true. Let me ask you very directly, because you work with Guaido's team, you're sitting in D.C., we see an image of the Capitol behind you. The claim from Maduro, the claim from his foreign minister, is that this was a coup d'etat attempt orchestrated by Washington that is not even being orchestrated by Guaido. So are you currently sitting in D.C. working with the Americans to overthrow Maduro's government?
Well, first and foremost, we're not going to overthrow any government because Maduro doesn't have a government. It's an illegitimate government. They shouldn't be there. And I will say this and be very clear. This was not a coup d'etat. This is not a coup d'etat because we're not overthrowing a government. The government belongs to the people of Venezuela and it belongs to Guaido. If we go back to 2018, Maduro called illegal elections. He called illegal elections in May of last year. They were not real, which is why this year, when he tried to claim himself as president, it was illegitimate. And the Constitution of Venezuela backs this up. This is not a coup d'etat. The international community understands this.
Let's go away from the terminology. Let's go away from the terminology. Are you working with the Americans? Do you have meetings with Americans, whether at the White House? Okay, do you have meetings with State Department, White House, I don't know, Congressman, DOD, I don't know. Do you have meetings with them talking about bringing Guaido to power with American help, money, influence? Yes or no, sir?
I'm not going to speak publicly of what is happening in meetings. And if we have learned one thing, is that when you say too much, things don't work. This is why yesterday, no one knew what was happening tomorrow. Yesterday, in the very early mornings, Juan Guaido with Leopoldo Lopez released by the military that supposedly were Maduro supporters. They weren't, because they're in the right side of history. We are very, very close of taking our country back. I'm not going to speak public of what type of meetings
but we'll take it as,
and what type of meetings we're not having.
We'll
but what I can tell you is we are very, very close.
We'll take it as...
Is it possible? Is it?
Okay, come in.
I was going to say that we are not in a tribunal here. I am a Venezuelan who has no connection whatsoever with the State Department or the Donald Trump government, but I speak for the people of Venezuela because 90% plus of the Venezuelan people are with Juan Guaido by all independent polls. All the indices of the Venezuelan people at this moment are in the lowest positions of international rankings. We are almost last in competitiveness. We are last in corruption. We are last in the misery index published has Venezuela as the most miserable regime in the world. So fortunately, all the evidence is for all the world to see.
And Mr. Coronel, yes, I hope you understand. It's my job to ask the question, right? The claim is from Maduro and his supporters that there's a coup d'etat being orchestrated from Washington. We have to address that.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead and ask the questions, because I could also ask you, for example, are you in Maduro's payroll after so many years of chanting the good things about Chavez first and now Maduro? I mean, I know that sometimes there are ideological fanatics, but some others, like there are others who are simply mercenaries. Okay, so that's also a legitimate question.
Okay, but for the record, I was not on Hugo Chavez's payroll, and I'm not on Nicolas Maduro's payroll. Let me go to Paul.
Well,
certainly.
I congratulate you because others were.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to Paul Dobson. Paul, we just heard from Gustavo, we heard from Jose earlier on, and the point that they're making is that this is not even a question of legitimacy when it comes to Maduro anymore, because it's long gone. He lost his legitimacy. He wrecked the economy, he made a mess of the country, and this is just a process where there's an inevitability of Guaido coming to power, because that's what the people want. Paul, is that a reality in your eyes?
Well, just before I answer that question, I'd like to leave it clear that I'm also not on anyone's payroll, let alone Nicolas Maduro, and certainly not Donald Trump, like some of the opposition members in Venezuela have proven to be. If I were, I would be earning a lot more than I am. The inevitability of regime change is a political line spun in the media by principally the US, but also regional allies. It's put out there to try to convince those who are doubtful about the success of their regime change tactics and to try to bring them on board. Essentially, what we have to look at here, Imran, is how, if Venezuelans want change, what is the strategy to bring about this change? Is it through US bombing? Is it through a coup d'etat by somebody who was not elected to be president. He was elected to be a member of the National Assembly. Or is the strategy to bring about a change in the political direction of the country through the ballot box? Is it a democratic way? And I think when people outside of Venezuela are looking at the situation, we have to put aside to some extent our personal opinion or evaluation of the performance of the current government, because this isn't necessarily an issue about whether we like Maduro or
Paul,
not.
they're saying that the last time this was put to a democratic test, Maduro rigged it. It was a sham. That's why they don't trust him in this democratic process. They feel that he had his chance.
My response to this is twofold. Firstly, the independent electoral observers, who are the technicians, declared the elections to be free and fair. And secondly, the opposition leaders, Juan Guaido, all of the rest of the parliamentary leaders, were elected using exactly the same electoral system which was used to elect Nicolas Maduro in May. So if the system was rigged, then they also have no legitimate authority in their roles in the National Assembly either.
Okay,
That's the response.
okay. So let me pop out of this for a second and talk geopolitics. Gustavo, I know you have a lot to say. I want to ask you about the geopolitics and the support on both sides, right? So yes, there are more than 50 countries that support Guaido and this movement. The United States, the Europeans, the Brazilians, the Colombians. On the other hand, there are countries who support Maduro. The Russians, as was mentioned, and there are all sorts of rumors that go along with that. The Chinese, Turkey showing its support for Maduro. We see that the fault lines geopolitically are being drawn at the moment. Do you believe that the people on your side are more useful right now in order to fulfill your goals?
Well, let's put it this way. Guaido's government is supported by, as you say, by the United States, Canada, the European Union, the Lima Group, which is the majority of the big countries in Latin America, and the rest of the democratic world, whereas the regime of Maduro is still supported by Cuba, by China and Russia, that have invested heavily in the Venezuelan of Chavez and Maduro. So whereas we are committed to a change for democracy in Venezuela, Russia and China and Cuba and Nicaragua are ideologically driven. I mean, there is no desire to install in Venezuela a truly democratic country from the side of the Russians and the Chinese. So on that basis, I am sure that trying to get a real democracy in Venezuela installed is on the right side of things. Right. I have no doubt about it.
Okay. So then, Jose, with that in mind, so we're seeing the different countries back their different candidates, if you like. The Mexicans are still saying, please, allow us to mediate. Allow us to come and find a bridge between the two and some common ground. Is that moment over? Are the Mexicans wasting their time by trying to find compromise?
Well, I think so, and this is why. I mean, part of it is we've tried to negotiate with Maduro and his regime for a very long time. Zapatero, former president of Spain, tried to get involved. The Pope tried to get involved. The Catholic Church certainly got to get involved, and we got nowhere. So I think the days of negotiation are over. What we're asking for is very simple. We want to take the country back. We want free elections. President Guaido has said it from the very beginning. He is the interim president. He is the president until we get free elections in Venezuela and we have a real democracy. Maduro has lost his chance. We've tried to work with him. He has failed. He's illegitimate. A majority of countries, this is not just me, this is not just Washington, this is pretty much a majority of countries in the world. They support President Guaido. We are going to continue to put economic sanctions on the Venezuelan dictatorship and Maduro. We're going to continue doing that through oil. We've taken the reins back of Citgo, of the board of directors. So there's a lot of oil in Venezuela, as you know. So the more you start to cut the money that comes from the oil supply in Venezuela, Maduro is going to have a very, very hard time maintaining power. He has been able to do it for the last 4 months, and I understand that. But this sort of things take time. He has no choice. I think we've been very clear. You have Maduro he can leave today. He can end this once and for all. He can leave today. He can go to Cuba. He can go to Russia. He can go to Turkey, China. We don't really care. You can leave today, Mr. Maduro. You can leave the country, and we'll have real free elections. He's had his chance and he's lost it.
Yeah, what a lot of people are fearing is that this will be a fight to the finish, and that could get very bloody and very ugly, and we hope it does not. But we will be watching the situation in Venezuela very, very closely.
That's right, and us the same. Us the same. Nobody wants bloodshed. Trust me, I'm with you on that. Nobody wants bloodshed in Venezuela. I hope we don't get to that. I hope we don't get to that. Maduro has an opportunity to evade that by leaving power.
Okay, well, gentlemen, we're out of time, but I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Paul Dobson, Jose Aristimuno, Gustavo Coronel, and earlier Emiliana Duarte. And just full disclosure, we had Eva Gollinger, who was a former advisor to Hugo Chavez, who had agreed to come on the program and then didn't want to be involved in the panel, unfortunately, because it would have been good to get her perspective. But be that as it may, thank you very much. Looking forward to talking to you all again sometime soon.